Okay, I think we're in business.
Yep, I just got prompted to leave the meeting.
Oh, no, please stay. Don't leave.
No, I can't be recorded. That'd be terrible. Oh no. So none of this is on the record, right?
No one's going to hear this. Fine, don't worry.
Cool.
Matthew Partridge, Errant Science. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
No problem, Harriet. No, it's great to be on.
Yeah. So now, Matthew, you graduated with a BSc in biochemistry and a PhD in fiber optic molecular sensors, and you're known now for a company called Errant Science, which is your company. And we'll come on to that in a little bit because it's quite interesting. But before it all took off, if you like, you were born in Kettering in Northants, and you were packed off to boarding school when you were 7. I don't want to stop you drinking. Take that sip of your tea.
No, it's fine. I can drink and reply. I'm secretly a ventriloquist.
Wow. So tell me a little bit. First of all, which school did you go to? Where were you packed off to? And what was it like? How did it feel?
I mean, I guess I'd like to say my education started when I got off to boarding school, but obviously at aged 7 I had other education. I guess that was just the more dramatic part of my education, because instead of going down to the local prep school, the local primary school, I was shipped off to Windsor, where I went to St George's in Windsor. And slightly dating myself, people can now sit down and do the calendar, but I was at Windsor boarding school when the Windsor fire happened. And if anybody who knows Windsor geography, I went to the little boarding school that's right at the bottom of the banks of the Windsor Castle, and we had like front row seats on a whacking great Windsor fire, which is pretty it's a cool dramatic thing to have in my childhood. I got to we couldn't play on our playing fields because they were covered in debris and stuff like that. So that was kind of like I going into boarding school was quite dramatic. So I guess that was a good place to start with my education. Seeing a giant fire is just a fun memory. Not a great memory, I suppose, but a fun one.
Was it clear to you that it was the significance of it? Not that all fires aren't significant, but
I mean, again, it was kind of pre-internet. So, and I'm a 7-year-old boy going, "Wow, that looks amazing." And it wasn't really until probably the next day, or probably even the day after that, when we had time to watch TV or whatever it was. I don't think we had the radio, but watch TV, and then there were kind of news reports about this kind of terrible fire and how damaging it was. But at the time, you're 7 years old and there's bright lights. It's amazingly how compelling bright lights are to 7-year-olds. So that was the sort of the thrill.
So you're still at boarding school, and you started getting into a particular author. How old were you when you started reading Patricia Cornwell? Because I don't think that's necessarily suitable for a 7-year-old.
It really isn't. No. So I going to boarding school pre-internet, I should say again. You've got a lot of time, and I can't just kind of go out with my friends. I can't just kind of meet them at the local park. It doesn't quite work like that. So I really loved reading, right the way through. So I read a lot of books and all sorts of stuff. And I started I went through stuff like Terry Pratchett, and kind of quite fun stuff, more kid-focused stuff. And I have no idea how I started reading Patricia Cornwell, who is still writing the Kay Scarpetta series that I read. These books are about Kay Scarpetta, who's this pathologist who solves crimes and is inexplicably in the center of most of these crimes somehow. It makes for thrilling reading, but makes no logical sense. And I kind of got really into these books. I found them really fascinating. And my parents are both pharmacists, and as I was kind of starting to read these books, I started to look in my kind of parents' library. My mum had 100 Ways to Kill Someone and 100 Poisoners. I should say no one related or close to my mum has ever died in mysterious circumstances, but she has the books. And I just kind of really devoured these books. I really enjoyed them, and I thought they were really fascinating, but not in kind of, it was weird because obviously they're quite morbid, but it wasn't, the bit I was finding interesting wasn't the weird deaths or the strange circumstances. It was the kind of the weirdly complicated poisons and the sort of the biochemical way I suppose they work. And I found those kind of very interesting. I think, about a year before I kind of was probably getting into those books, I had a science teacher very resoundingly tell me that I should consider any career but science, which, I think I didn't really take that to heart. He wasn't my favorite science teacher, but it certainly, I certainly was enjoying it enough that it was like, no, I'm pretty sure a career in science will be just fine, especially if it involves all these horrible poisonous things, which, as it turns out, my career has not really involved very much. So, it gave me, at least, with two parents who are pharmacists and reading lots of books about horrible poisons, when it came to kind of time to choosing a degree, that was kind of, I guess, kind of going through my head a little bit as to what I kind of wanted to do and how I wanted to do a job in research, whatever that meant.
It certainly explains the biochemistry degree for sure.
Well, it would, but it was not my first choice. So I opened the little UCAS handbook, and I wanted to do a degree in biotoxicology, and in the little UCAS handbook I ran my finger down, and I was like, oh no, I needed an A-level in maths. I don't have that. Oh, scratch that. What's next? Oh, just do biochemistry. And it was I remember sitting at the little computer in the little prep room at school with the little book, and being like, oh, well, that rules that out. I guess I'll apply for this then. And literally on the computer in front of me was my UCAS application. And I just changed it from biotoxicology to biochemistry. And off I went, in one of those, like, changed my, in not like life trajectory as such, but changed my degree trajectory, certainly, on a complete random, can't do that, do this instead.
I think that's fair enough. Absolutely, relaxed attitude, just what you need.
Yeah, I think that really shines through in my terrible exam grades. If I'd had only less of a relaxed attitude, I may have done better in my exams. But it turns out none of those mattered, so it was all right.
It really didn't matter because you've got a PhD.
Yeah,
and in something slightly different.
Yeah, so I did my bachelor's at Lancaster University, which is a lovely, if very grey, rainy and damp university. And then I did my degree, and I was kind of like, well, this is fine, but I kind of want to go and do a job. So I actually went into industry for about 5 years before going back to academia to do my PhD. So I spent 5 years making diagnostics and then doing a little bit of consulting and stuff like that. So
back to the biochemistry, you didn't have any teachers there. This is at Lancaster. You didn't have any teachers there telling you this wasn't the future for you.
Not really. I mean, I was one of, I don't know how many cohorts. I'm not sure I had many teachers who even knew who I was most of the time. Okay. I mean, especially because I think I had a supervisor to do my dissertation, but he left halfway through. So like, it wasn't, I didn't really leave there, on first name terms with any of the professors. I didn't in any way kind of shine out. I suppose I got my degree, and I had a great time. It was lovely. So I made some good friends that I'm still friends with now, 20 something years later. So that's all right. But there wasn't anybody who told me I still shouldn't consider a career in science. I think they'd at least resigned the fact that I was probably fairly committed. Being there doing a degree in biochemistry.
Indeed, quite keen. So then you left there. Your first job was, as you said, the diagnostics. So you were doing rapid blood tests for prostate cancer. Now that presumably was lab based.
It was, yeah. So so at university, one of the subjects I hated the most was immunology. If you've ever studied immunology, I found it tedious and boring. So obviously the first job I got was in immunodiagnostics.
What did you find so boring about?
I don't know. I think it was just the lecturer was boring. I don't know. I just remember really not liking that module, and then ending up that was my job. In that way, because when you leave university, especially for lab jobs, you just want a lab job. I wanted to work in a research lab, and you don't really know what. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what I could do. I mean, biochemistry is a very broad degree, and there's a million jobs you can do with it. And fresh out of university, you don't really understand what it's like to do a job. So I just kind of fished around, and eventually I got offered a job doing this, making what are called immunodiagnostics, which now the entire world knows very well because it's the same technology that's behind the little COVID rapid tests. It's the little lateral flow strips. Which back then the only people who would have recognized it were people who were testing if they're pregnant, which is also the same technology. But yeah, so for a number of years I worked for a little company called MediWatch, which I think has changed hands and been sold like 3 times since then, so is now no longer called that. And they were making a 10-minute prostate cancer test using finger prick samples. So when I came in, it hadn't gone to production yet, it hadn't quite finished development, so it was a bit of like day-to-day in the lab, testing them, trying out different antibody formulations, trying out different strip shapes, that kind of stuff, and trying to build a better test. And then there was a bit of make the test something we can mass produce, and then there was a bit of test the test with some real people. So it was kind of it was a real like life cycle that I got to experience, which was very lucky to work at a small company, because then I got to do everything as well. So it was a good time.
Yeah. It does sound quite comprehensive. And then so from there you weren't tempted to carry on to another job. You went back into academia at that point.
Yeah, well, I really loved the job, and I really enjoyed the kind of the research side of it, but I was particularly enjoying developing new tests, new diagnostics that I was started to kind of do towards the end of my time there. And that was really fun. So I'd kind of realized I'd probably done as much as I could do at that small company, and I wanted to apply for jobs elsewhere. And when I was applying, I could see that there was a little bit of an educational ceiling, so to speak, because if I didn't have a master's or if I didn't have a PhD, I couldn't get the slightly higher jobs developing stuff or designing my own things or running my own little team. So it was like, well, okay, well, I'm either going to have to spend another 5 to 10 years getting loads of experience and persuading people that I can do this and to promote me, or I'm going to have to go back to university and get a kind of another qualification. So I went back to Cranfield University, which is near Milton Keynes, for anyone who doesn't know where that is. And Cranfield was then quite a rare thing. It was a post-grad only university. So there's no undergrads. There's only masters and PhDs. And I went to do an MRes, which at the time I liked because it was a master's where you don't have to take any exams. You just write some stuff. And 5 years after university, my first university, I was definitely done taking exams for anything. So the idea of an MRes appealed to me. But I'd been there. I didn't even make it to the university before the course was unfortunately pulled, and I got a call from the university saying, "Look, we can't take you on the MRes because we've had to cancel the course. But would you like to join a PhD instead?" And I was like, "Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll take the better one." that sounds better than an MRes. Sure, I have to commit 3 years, but like I won't even bother doing the masters. I'll just go straight to PhD. I'll skip a step. And so yeah, I started my PhD instead, which was a bit strange because it all happened in like a week. I was literally kind of getting ready to go back to university to do an MRes, and then I was getting ready, 2 or 3 days later to go and start a PhD, which is an odd way to start one, really.
Yeah, I guess so. I think a lot of people have got to sort of worry for a while about what to do their PhD in, and it's quite unusual to go, "Hey, do you want to do that?" Yeah, just like that.
So I guess it's one of those things where if they've got the funding, and my experience later on in academia, if there's funding, you really want to spend the funding, and if you've got a good candidate that you like, or at least that you think you can probably get on with enough to meet with every other week, you kind of want to just jump on it and go for it. And I guess that was sort of what happened. So yeah.
So it didn't matter necessarily even the subject matter of that PhD. It was more than
not. To some extent it did. I mean, I want to do so the MRes was based on biosensors, and I still, I really enjoyed developing sensors, as my immunodiagnostics and diagnostics, and I wanted to keep doing that. I really enjoyed kind of coming up with new ideas, new ways to test for stuff and find things. chemical things mostly, not buried treasure. And I wanted to keep doing that. So the PhD had to still be developing sensors. And initially it was fiber optic sensors for finding benzene and toluene, which was basically carrying on from another PhD. But I very quickly kind of changed it and adapted it. So we did the benzene and the toluene in the first couple of months and skipped straight on to doing a bunch of other stuff. So we did all kinds of, I measured all kinds of things with the fiber sensors, designed new fiber sensor platforms, and then eventually designed like a methodology for creating fiber sensors, sort of manufacturing them in a way that, you can then coat and stick stuff on with and all that sort of thing. So so did a lot with it, but it was good. It was a good PhD. It was I had a really lovely supervisor who's still at Cranfield. So Steve James, who I don't think has ever listened to any of the podcasts that I've done, but maybe he'll listen to this one. Is a brilliant supervisor. So
we'll definitely send it to Stephen James. Hope he gets to hear it. So I mean, you were doing that for a while and coupling that with a little bit of consultancy work, and you've got a couple of interesting stories from that. And in between then and now, I'm just wondering when it was that you worked out that you could draw.
So never. I still can't draw. So go back to MediWatch and my first job. You really it's a small company, and there was literally 3 of us in this lab, and one of the 3 played golf half the time. So it was really just 2 of us. And then there was kind of a head office that did a few things, but basically all the jobs that needed doing by normally a large multinational of people, we had to do. So even to the point when we were creating the test, we wanted to include like a little guide to tell nurses how to use it, and we wanted to illustrate it. So I offered to draw this guide. So I drew, unfortunately, if I only had one to hand, but I drew like a step-by-step guide of how to do this test, and that was probably one of the first things I did. I was like, oh, this is turns out I'm not terrible at art, if I just put my mind to it and paid. And so I did that. And around the same time, I'd started writing like a blog, like a personal blog, while I was, I do it on my lunch breaks. And I found that it was kind of fun and I enjoyed it. But if I just include Google images all the time, A, I was liable to get in trouble for copyright sooner or later. And B, it just looked a bit bland. So I started drawing like little cartoons for that. But they were, I say drawing, what they were was a series of circles that I drew in like an equivalent of MS Paint. So it was just like a little circle for a head, a little circle for a body, and circles for hands and circles for feet, with a little text underneath. And a little cartoon character. His little name was D-I-S. And I drew him for every article that I wrote. And I was kind of writing like 5 a week, something like that. So it was a lot. And I did these cartoons to go with it, and so that was the first kind of cartoon character I made, and I kind of liked doing that. That was really fun, but it was it was quite time consuming, and towards the end of the job, when I was doing some of the consulting, I kind of ended that, but it was enjoyable, and the 6 people that read it always said lovely things about it, and so I kind of that was always in my mind, and then towards the end of my PhD, because by that time it'd been about 5 years since I'd stopped doing the blog, I was like, well, it would be, social media is growing ever faster. It'd be really good to have a departmental blog to kind of talk about all the things the department does and kind of show off what we do. And I've done blogging before. I can do blogging. So again, I started a blog for the department, ostensibly, and then within about 3 months it became clear it wasn't really the department's blog at all, it was my blog. So what was engineering photonics blog became Errant Science. So the first few articles of Errant Science were originally engineering and photonics articles, and then it morphed into this other thing, and then just like before, I realized that articles are fun, but articles are way more fun if they're illustrated. And so I stuck a little cartoon character in, which at the time, started to be little hand-drawn circles on a little paint program. And then it got to be sticky notes where I'd drawn something and taken a photo and then just attached that image. And then it became sticky notes where I'd taken a photo, I'd then manipulated it to look a bit more computery and put that in. And then it became drawn on like a tablet, an iPad mini, and it just kind of very slowly kind of migrated. And now the blog barely posts and the cartoons are daily. The cartoons have taken over. We're long past the origins of the blog. The cartoons killed the blog. The blog is dead. But people like the cartoons more than they like my writing, which is fine. I've learned to accept this. It's only been 15 years, but I'm eventually coming to terms with it.
It's nice how the technology kept pace with the evolution of that journey.
I think it was more the what I could afford. I mean, I could have got a Wacom tablet right away. They existed, but it was I'm drawing hand-drawn stick figures. It's hard to argue that that's worth the money. But yeah, it slowly increased. I put more work or more money into it, the more people were reading it to some extent. So it was like, oh, I should probably make these half decent. So
I'll ask you a little bit more about the cartoons and Errant Science in a minute. But we just skip back a little bit back to the consultancy work you did, because you had a couple of quite interesting sounding clients.
Yeah, so after I worked at MediWatch, I obviously got the MRes place quite many months beforehand, and so I handed in my notice, and I got offered by two people who worked quite close to me and who I knew quite well some consulting work, and one of them was an artist called Jane Eden. She's a brilliant artist. Everyone should immediately Google her. Please pause the podcast. We'll wait. And she specializes in beautiful art that kind of is looking at biomechanics, I suppose, in some of her art pieces, but in other art pieces is looking at does a lot with birds and things like that as well. But one of the things that she'd been commissioned to do at the time was to create bollards that had little dioramas in them. So you would peer into the little hole in a little viewfinder in the bollard, and inside is like a little diorama. And so yeah, and so that was one of the projects she was working on at the time.
Where were those bollards?
They are in Wales.
Gosh.
I think they're in. I believe they're in Cardiff. They're in Cardiff city centre. But they've been there a long time. So I think they're still doing well.
They're like art installations.
No, they're bollards. They're regular bollards around the city centre, but they have little view holes, and you can peer into them. But there's signs up and stuff. They're very well signposted. But yeah, they are absolutely brilliant. And she was working on another project at the time with Kew Gardens, with the Economic Botany Collection, which is again another brilliant thing that everybody should immediately go and read about, because the Economic Botany Collection at Kew is a fascinating scientific trove of mad things. But she was working on doing an art project with that, so she paid me to do a whole load of research into all these weird artifacts from the 1800s. So that was really great. And then alongside that, there was a synthetic chemist who was interested in a number of little projects that he wanted to get done but didn't have time, and so he paid me to do some contract research developing ways to test the quality of a pap smear chemical. So the chemical behind the way that pap smears are done, he wanted to develop a test to prove that it was good, that it was a good chemical when you've got a good batch or when you've got a bad batch, so that there can be better quality control, so that pat labs can make sure they're doing the best quality tests they can do. And so yeah, I did that as well. So that was a really fascinating little project.
It does sound it. And just to clarify, PAP is the smear test.
It's the smear test, yes.
Yeah. And that PAP is short for the name of the person who devised it.
No, it isn't short, but isn't it short for papilloma? I can't remember. Yes, no, I don't know. Can't remember that bit. Okay. I can tell you all about the stain hematoxylin and its oxidation rates, which is the chemical bit. I could do that bit.
About the chemical bit.
So yeah, so I got to do, two quite interesting things. Again, really kind of fun, different projects, but still science and research. And the 1800s was stuff particularly was just, I'm a massive nerd for the 1800s kind of science era. A big part of my PhD thesis and my literature review, I wrote about the development of fiber optics in the 1800s, which was really fun because I was a biochemist working with physicists, none of whom knew any of that story. And it was like, well, you should know it. It's brilliant and fascinating. And then on the back of kind of some of the stuff that I'd researched my thesis, I did a show at the Fringe all about how fiber optics can destroy or save the world. And it kind of tells you the story and the history of fiber optics, but through kind of ways that those fiber optics can do amazing things now. So it was kind of a bit of an outreach thing and a bit of a stand-up comedy thing up at the Fringe, which I did twice. So
Wow. You don't. There are so many times I find that that scientists have an artistic outlet, and I kind of knew it with you being doing what you do, but I didn't realize you had quite such an artistic outlet, performing as well.
No, it's just I'm just faking it. It's all lies. So you're just pretending that I have an artistic output.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll carry on pretending for a minute then.
Luckily, no one in the audience rumbled that I was still pretending when I was on stage, so it was fine.
Got away with it. So now you've got quite a lot of experience now under your belt, a lot of education, a lot of qualifications, a lot of fun by the sense of it. And you decided to set up your own company, Errant Science, which you've mentioned. Tell us about the name Errant. For itself, but I don't want to make assumptions.
So first thing about the name is for quite a long time, and I say a long time, I mean like 3 years, I didn't pronounce it errant. Everybody else does. But
Okay.
it's not a word you hear very often. So I would mispronounce it errant. So errant. So it's quite hard to say it the wrong way now. I've kind of eventually got myself out of the habit. So for a long time, I couldn't pronounce my own website. But I chose that because I needed a brand. It needed a name. I needed to choose something. I wanted it to be something science because I always wanted it to be about science. And I chose errant because errant. I chose errant because I thought like the idea of kind of errant knights who kind of would go and just do random stuff. They weren't really married to any particular place. They would just go from place to place doing sort of almost not quite knights for hire, but sort of random quests. And then it's that it has the double meaning of to be errant is to be an outlier. It's to be different, which again it fits quite nicely with a blog that I think whose tagline I can't remember if it still is, but it was for a long time. It's an irreverent look at science. It's designed to be like a silly like send up of science sometimes or life in research.
Lovely. It's a lovely story how you got to that name. I really enjoy it. And tell us a bit more about the company, what you do there, how it works, and who you work with.
So I mean, I guess the company is the end of not the end of it, but where we are now with it, because it's taken a very long time to evolve into that. So it was a blog I was doing, in my spare time, and cartoons I was doing, in my lunch times and things like that. And then, over time we'd get kind of the odd request to do something where someone would be like, oh, could you draw me a cartoon? And I draw them a cartoon. And then, we'd get other requests, here and there to do specific things. And then I think one year on a little bit of a whim, I decided to cartoon Royal Society of Chemistry as Twitter conference. And that is a online conference. It's no longer on Twitter. It's moved to LinkedIn this year, but until this year, it was on Twitter, with lots and lots of posters that people put online for 24 hours. And I drew a whole bunch of cartoons in this 24-hour period for a whole bunch of people, and it was like a live event thing that we did. And then next year we got in touch with the Royal Society of Chemistry and said, hey, we'd love to do it again, but it was so much work. Could we have something for that? And they were like, yeah, sure, we'll pay you for that. And I was like, oh, we could maybe make money out of this. Maybe we could produce content that people want and get some pay for it. And then not from that, but certainly that kind of gave us a bit of the idea that we could go and maybe do some other things. We could go to conferences. So we went to EGU, which is a huge conference in Vienna every year. And we were the conference, we were the conference cartoonist one year. And then the following year, they created something called the Artist in Residence program for us to be there, because they wanted to pay us more, so they needed to create a thing that it was, and we were the artist in residence that year, alongside Sam Ellingworth, who was the poet in residence. So we produced some combo stuff. And the EGU ever since then has always had an artist in residence. I like that it was a role that was created for us and has continued to exist. But that was, again, something where they wanted us to produce cartoon content from all their posters and all their science that they were doing throughout their conference, and for us to put up online, of them to put up online. And I just kind of enjoyed doing that a lot. And I thought, I will keep trying to do this whenever I get a random spare moment. I can go to random science conferences and draw random bits of science. This is fantastic. Seeing and understanding science is already my day job. This isn't really adding extra work. It's just adding doodling to the work that I was already doing. So it kind of fitted really, really well. And on top of that, we'd occasionally get asked to come and give talks and training about how we craft those cartoons or how we craft those stories. And then that evolved a bit into training on how to do social media for scientists, which we give as well. So we run training courses for not only to teach scientists how to draw cartoons, but we run training courses on how to storify research and how to do social media. And all of that, I was doing here and there in and amongst, my full-time job and having kids. And I have two fantastic kids. And I became a single dad, and being an academic, a full-time academic, and being a single dad is pretty hard. And I found it a bit too difficult to try and do that at the same time, whereas it turns out drawing cartoons a lot easier than writing research grants or writing papers. So it was kind of quite good that I could just basically stop my full-time job for a while. I can go on sabbatical, which is what I keep calling it, but it's now been 3 years. I can go on a bit of a break, a career break, and I can just draw cartoons and communicate science. And at that point, that was when it stopped being like a fun little side company that I can kind of earn some extra pocket money with, and became a thing that I needed to turn on the lights with and pay for food with as well. So it became, I suddenly had more of an impetus to go out and get, find people who needed our services and produce good quality content for them, and that sort of thing. And since then we've done all sorts of things. We've helped design manuals for board games with kind of illustrations. We've done conference programs. We've done a lot of live cartooning at conferences and virtual conferences, a lot of training. And we've even made a plushie of one of our cartoons for somebody, because they wanted a shark cat that they could take to conferences and show on their social media feeds. So yeah, we've done some weird and wacky, wonderful stuff, but mostly it involves either helping other people prepare their outreach or doing outreach for people. It's kind of one of those two things. Is definitely what we do at the moment.
Oh, it sounds so much fun. You really make it sound so much fun as well. And even though there's a slight serious note in there along the way. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about why it actually works so well, why cartoons resonate so well with people, and why it's such a good way of explaining what it is that needs to be explained.
Well, I think cartoons work very well because they are very good at reaching across or outside of a very specific field sometimes, where you have a paper or something like that, which can only really be well read by people who are either in your exact field or in very closely related fields. Drawing a cartoon of your work will reach people even further than that. Drawing something that kind of makes fun of it is a nice flag, a nice way of people going, what? That's really interesting. I want to know what that's about. And cartoons are quite good because they're quite visually striking. They work really well on social media. People are more likely to look at a cartoon than they are to read an article. And they, by their nature, they're designed to be simplistic and expressive. So you don't draw an accurate HPLC machine. You draw a box and you write on the bottom HPLC. And everybody knows that that square rectangle is an HPLC. You don't have to draw stuff accurately. You just have to kind of roughly explain through pictorially what can be very complicated things, but done in such a way that anyone could look at it and immediately understand the kind of core piece of that work. It's amazing what people will recognize or people will understand without it needing to be a technical drawing. Even like paper visual abstracts that a lot of journals do these days still have to be accurate technical figures or diagrams. And mostly those are terrible because those are very hard and you have to kind of unpick them and have to have a very long caption underneath. Whereas a cartoon should be something you look at immediately and go, what? I want to see that. I want to know that. I want to understand that. Or, oh, I kind of get what they're doing. It should have one very clear, quick little message that just resonates with people. And that's what we try to draw. And that's what we try to teach people to draw as well. It's all about that, keeping it simple. I'm not sure when our next live training session is, so I can't even plug it, but we'll do one eventually and everybody can come. But at some point, we're the ones that we're doing at the moment are all in-house, so for other people, but we do public ones from time to time.
Brilliant. Well, we'll look out for those. It seems like a silly question to ask, really, because it sounds like you have the best time all the time. But I wondered if you had a particular fond memory of doing the lab work.
Oof. I really loved lab work, and I really like, even though I do the cartooning now full time and I love it to bits, I really enjoy it. I miss the lab terribly. Like I do a little bit of consulting still. I help a few people out here and there, and occasionally that means I get to go into the lab and pretend that I know what I'm doing and I'm very experienced and tell people what to do. And I really love being back in the lab. It's like occasionally they'll say, "Oh, we're sorry for taking up all of your time." It's like, no, please let me stay here longer. I'll stay. Let me stay overnight. So I really miss the lab, and like I look back at my years in the lab really, really fondly. But all of my really good, like really amazing memories are proper, like when I had like eureka moments when stuff like worked. Like just I had a bit of a random idea the night before and I came into the lab and it's like, wow, that this ridiculously stupid idea I had that I thought was stupid is actually brilliant and I'm a genius. I am gonna win the Nobel Prize. There's nothing I've invented is that good, but at the time you invent stuff, or at the time that little thing, you see that trace of data and it's got the little uptick where there should be an uptick, and you're like, wow, holy crap, it worked. And that is just the most amazing feeling. And yeah, it is like a proper drug. It's I've not had that sort of thing in a few years, and I still am jonesing for it pretty bad. Get like the withdrawal shakes and everything.
So if you're listening and you've got a spare space on a lab bench, then get in touch with Matthew.
If you make us a visiting researcher, we will come and hang out in your lab and draw cartoons of your lab. I'll just come and play with some pets. I'll be in my element, promise.
Brilliant. So let's say you've got control of the future. What's your dream scenario? What would you like most?
I'd like to never ever have to apply for money again. It was the thing that I hated doing in academia, like having to apply for grants and funding. I've written so many articles about the funding system in the UK and in Europe. It just makes me so mad, and it's so frustrating that it just took away a lot of time from doing research, was worrying about where we were going to get money to do research. And that is still true as a cartoonist. It's just a different kind of pressure because, as I said, I'm drawing cartoons and trying to make a living out of it. Not only do I have to worry about how to make some very obscure mathematical formula a funny, interesting cartoon, I also have to worry about whether or not I can charge someone for that cartoon, because my daughter would quite like to go to theatre, or whatever it is that I need to pay for. And it never stops being a big driving force behind either science or being creative, is this kind of perpetual looming fear of having to apply for money or having to write grants, which again we still do. Even as a cartoonist, we help prepare outreach grants for people, and so if I could wave a magic wand, it would be a magic wand for myself and for others. It would be to completely revamp all of the funding in the sciences, because the current system makes me so mad.
Is there a particular project that you would like currently to get funded?
Oh God, that's a good question. Yeah. So back when I first started my PhD, I work with a technology called Langmuir Blodgett, which nobody. Langmuir Blodgett. It's named after Irving Langmuir and Catherine Blodgett, and it's a very niche. It's really niche. There's only, I think at the time I was working on it, I was the fourth researcher in the UK, and during the time I worked on it, one of them sadly passed away and two of them retired. So for a brief while, I think it was just me, and then I stopped. So I don't know where that field is now, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty niche. But while I was working on it, I did a collaboration with one of the others and a synthetic chemist, and we found a particularly odd effect. And it's a really, I'm not going to explain it, but it was a very odd effect on the surface of these thin films that we were creating. And between then and when I stopped working in the university a few years ago, I would periodically go back to it and just sort of look at the data and kind of play with it, because there's something really fascinating was going on with the chemistry, like really importantly fascinating. But I need about a 5-year research grant to do it. So if there was like a project that I could kind of do, it would be that. I want to spend 5 years researching this thing that I've got a crazy hunch and some slightly interesting data, but I'm very sure I can't persuade any funder to ever fund it, but I'm sure it's interesting. So there you go. That's my crazed project. But
so that can come under the magic wand then.
Yeah, I've been obsessing about that for 13 years. I think that's fair enough that I want that one to happen.
Great number, 13. So look, if anyone wants to see your cartoons, where do they go?
You could see the cartoons on errantscience.com and on Errant Sciences' various social media feeds. We're Errant Science on literally everything. If you find a social media that we're not on, wow, you've done well, because we're pretty efficient at joining them. You can also find our cartoons in a bunch of little places where they tend to pop up because we do commissions for people. But they are in every issue of Lab News at the back with some other fun content. And they're in every issue of Lab Horizons, which is a new magazine that not only do we do cartoons for, but we also do articles for as well. So there's a whole bunch of our stuff in there. So yeah, but go to errantscience.com and then all of the other places that you can find us.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait to go and have a proper look through, and hopefully a few other people will as well. Well, thank you, Matthew. That was really, really fun. What an interesting route you've taken to get to where you are. And I look forward to seeing much more of your work henceforth.